the society through this project and beyond. So I believe 1984 to 2000, and then again 2004 to 06. Does that sound right? Okay, welcome Joan.
It's lovely to be here with you tonight. And I have to tell you that in 1983, Jean Sally was president of the Historical Society, and the MDC had responded to Dr. Stepek and Stanley Ransom's request to give the house to the Historical Society. But they did it with, excuse me, a little bit of a string attached. They wanted it used, and we were in a position at that time to use it. So I volunteered to Jean to get a committee together that would take a good look at the house and see what we could do about it. And that committee was composed of Joe Alicata and Rob McCarsky, two resident architects, Paul Crundon, Jack Myler, who is now gone, and my husband Leon. And the four men, and Paul Crundon was the fifth, the four other men went over and looked at the house and came home to our home and were sitting talking about it. And they said, it's a wonderful house, it's sound, but there is so much to be done, and it's going to cost so much that they didn't think that our community could afford to do it at the time. And they were kind of down, and they were talking about it. And Paul Crundon came in, and he was late. And he came in, and he was so enthusiastic about the house and was so sure that things could be done. And he, he turned the whole temper of the meeting around. And when he agreed to be foreman of the renovation, not a restoration, it was a renovation. And when he agreed to be foreman of it, well, then everybody thought it was grand. And when he agreed to do that, I agreed at that point to raise what they thought would be about $50,000, the cost of doing it. So that's where we were, where we started. I have to tell you that how did the house look? There was an extension on the one side that had fallen, had collapsed. There was a group of terrible looking trees along the driveway that came in, that eventually Paul got Arnie Nielsen to take down and pull away. Those went away. Heike Crowlin worked in the gardens. Let me see. When we were restoring it, Pauline Scarrett and Lisa Crundon hung wallpaper, did interior painting. Marcia did interior painting. The work went on. Paul did a great deal of it himself. And he got his brothers and his children, and God help you if you were a friend of his. You were there too all the time. Paul was there all the time. And I remember one time, Lee and I went over on a Saturday, and we were going to take pictures of work in progress. And Paul was there, and he had a wheelbarrow in the living room, and he was mixing cement, and he was working on the fireplace. And he said to me, "Joan, do you ever lay any brick?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Come on over here." And he so in that fireplace, in that living room, a brick on the back wall. When they were looking at the house, I must tell you that the front door was not there at the time. But looking at it from the roadway, we knew by the positioning of the windows in the house that there must have been a front door there. And when they started to pull things apart, they found, first of all, that there was a stairway that went up right along the side wall. And that, when they pulled that down, that was put in later. When they pulled it down, that's when they discovered that the fireplace was hidden behind that. And then they found the place where the original stairway was and put the stairway back where it had originally been in the house. Paul himself gave wonderful cherry wood to the Historical Society. And I think it was Kenny Butler that did the tooling of this, what do you call the little posts?
The
Spindles,
staircase.
okay. They did the spindles, and they are just gorgeous. And Jack Myler, God love him, sanded and finished all of them, along with other things in the house. The house is a work of love and commitment. I know that Ellen and Ted and some of us were over there on Saturdays shoveling things out and sweeping up. And during spring vacations, I took students over from the elementary school. Is that here?
That's it.
Okay. I took students over from the elementary school, and they had the grandest time because there's nothing a couple of good boys like to do better than to hit with a sledgehammer and pull plaster down from the walls, and of course mouth droppings, 100 years of mouth droppings were going on their heads, and they pulled that down, and then the floor in the cellar was not deep enough, and they were down shoveling mud out of the cellar to make it, to make it deeper, and those were all exciting things to be done. Now, for fundraising, we went door to door, East and West Hartland, 2 times during the years when we were raising that money. Thanks to Ellen and to the East Hartland Fire Department, we got a list of roads and the people who lived on the roads. We had more than 20 people with cars and a couple of other people in each car, and we'd pull into a road and fan out and go and visit, knock on the doors. And in the beginning, we had to introduce the Historical Society to the town because they were not, it had not been terribly active. I have to tell you, when I was doing Filer Road, Foxbrook Road, and I went down and I knocked on your door at your house, and I was talking to Ronnie, and Ronnie said to me, shh, shh. Mia was just recently born, and she was upstairs sleeping, and Ronnie didn't want her awake by a strange voice downstairs. So we did get, we left flyers around, and we got donations, and then the second time, after things were pretty well established and people knew what was going on, we went around again. And those were the 2 major fundraising things that we did. The West Hartland firemen staged a dinner for us, a roast beef dinner that raised a good bit of money. And we had a marvelous, profitable raffle. And that raffle was, first of all, a quilt that the Women's Club had made, and it's really gorgeous. Well, I'll tell you that quilt has a long story. It was won by Mary Dwyer and Edith Leopold, and actually Mary won it, and it was on beds in their room, which is the house down at the Audubon Society now owns. And it had place of honor on beds in that house. When Mary died, Edith had it. And when Edith died, it came back to the Historical Society as of Mary Dwyer's request. And so now the Historical Society has that quilt back again, and it's over in the house in West Hartland. We raffled off the quilt. We had a small table that Gladwin Parmalee had made, and that's over in the house now. Again, that has come back to Bruce. We had a glass sculpture that Peg Jones had made. We had a tea cozy that Ada Mae Parmalee had given us. And I forget, there was something else, and I can't remember what the other one, but there were about 5 things on that raffle, and we had a lot of people selling tickets, and we made a great deal of money on that. We had the standard bake sales and small other items and things that sell, but eventually we did come up, and I believe the original estimate had been for $50,000, and I think it cost $49,000 and something, and more than 80% of the money that was raised here in Hartland. And it took us 5 years, but we did it, you know. And now, let me see, what else can I tell you about it? Okay. Oh, Sally Dewey was in charge of getting the artifacts together that we put in, and we had a day where we were cleaning them, washing them, and oiling them, and taking care of them. And Peg and Bill Jones, God love both of them, did yeoman's work in arranging things around the house. I mean, here you have a whole pile of stuff, and where are you going to put them? You know, where is the plan to arrange them? And that's where Peg really shone. She, Bill made, if you ever go upstairs in the small bedroom, there's a bed there, and everybody says, well, it's too small. Well, it is too small, but Peg and Bill donated the headboard and the footboard. And Bill said, we can't put a regulation size bed in that room. You couldn't walk around it. You couldn't get around the room. So he shortened the side posts, you know. So now you've got a headboard and a footboard, but the bed is not regulation size. That's all right. You can get around in the room. And I tell you, as Peg was arranging things in that house, God love her, she had a house full of antiques, and when there was an empty space that needed something attractive in it, Peg would go to her house and bring it back. And so she gave many things to the Historical Society. When opening day came, Paul Crunden built a small stage that went out from the front steps of the building, and we were going to have the presentation, you know, the talks from there, and people were going to be on the lawn. Well, as it turned out, it was a deluge, and so we had to move the ceremony indoors to the house in West Hartland, to the facility in West Hartland. And so we had, but people still wanted to go into the house because it was the first time. A lot of them had given money, and so they were standing.
It's raining again, Joe.
So they were standing on line outside the house in the rain, and I had called the Boy Scouts, and some of the Boy Scouts came over with umbrellas, and they were standing with people outside the house so that they could not get soaked while they were waiting to get into the house. And it was that was the kind of a day it was. It was really special. And at some point, I hope that you can see there is a tape of the opening ceremony that maybe.
We have the tape. We also have photos that are going to be seen tonight of that opening.
Okay.
Yeah.
At any rate, the house is there. If you've never been there, please go. It's a treasure. And it carries so much love and so much care that, and I must tell you that when we were finished working on it, he said, I don't want this place to sit here like a monument in a cemetery. I want it used. I want it used. And that's one of the reasons why we have the blueberry picnic there every year. And we used to have a tree lighting ceremony and a few other things. But at any rate, and we had some champagne parties and things like that. But at least it is being used.
I was thinking that we should have some mimosas at Blueberry Picnic. It is 25 years.
I hope I haven't made it hard and told something that Paul would like to tell or Joe would like to tell, but at any rate, that's my story.
Thank you, Joan. So now you'll be able to enjoy what was going on behind you, Joan.
Okay.
We're going to just let it keep on going. Next, we are going to have our next speaker, Joe Alicata. And as you heard, Joe has been an ongoing supporter of the society. He's been there whenever the need arises. And just to note, it's his design that we use as our seal when you see our books and our letterhead, etc. Joe's now going to talk about the floor plans and the structures. Are you going to be okay with no light?
That'd be fine.
Going to be all right?
Because I think, having those photographs still, I don't know, it's too dark. I mean, it's
Yeah, I
nice,
think, yeah,
it's really nice having these photographs.
right. Yeah, I think we can stop if, I do have that
Right.
shadow.
What I want to know is, like, how come Ted looks the same as
Thank
Doug?
you.
5 years ago, Ted, you just don't change. Well, good evening. As Joanne mentioned, I was involved with this project from the beginning, and as Joan mentioned, it all started with a knock on the door. That infamous knock. This lovely lady came into our home, and we had heard about this woman, Joan Stoll. And the idea that Joan came in with about this house, and me being an architect, and just thinking about going into business for myself at that time, made me think that, well, maybe this would be a good little project to get involved with. You can see the sparkle in Joan's eye at that point. So, we talked about it a little bit. She explained, the fundraising and the ideas of, of what the house was going to turn into. And Joan left. Within moments, I don't know how she did this. This was the day before cell phones. Joan was barely down the driveway. My phone rang. Paul Crundon was on the other end. Paul, just excitement in his voice, was as excited as Joan was, telling us about this project that she was going to undertake. And Paul said, I understand you're an architect. You want to donate your services. You're going into business for yourself. What better way to do a project is, but to do it, in your own town. And I said, gee, I can't agree with you more. And at that point, it was started my relationship with Paul. He was a mentor for me. There's this little photograph here. There's a couple photographs that Joanne has on the slides here. But when Paul called and he said, we're a little concerned that maybe we can't save this structure. So what do we do? I said, let's just get together and let's talk about it. Well, any kind of doubt in my mind before seeing the house went away, like Joan said, with this enthusiasm that Paul had. He went over, showed me the foundation. I grew up, my dad being a stonemason. Paul leans over and says, look at this stone. Look at this granite that stands up on end. And and it's an airspace that we have this beautiful foundation that needs a little pointing up. That's an understatement. Mortar was falling out. As you can see some of these photographs here. The joints were decaying, but Paul could see had that vision, which I quickly agreed with because it just, it was a beautiful house. I mean, you could see that there's a basic structure there that needed a little attention. So with this excitement that Paul had, of course, you just get carried away with that. So, the first step was to, well, how do we document this? Because, without sort of falling into the basement, do some drawings and take up, do some dimensions of what the house looked like. These are a couple of just, early on sort of cartoon-like sketches that Paul and I would do. We started dimensioning the house one challenge in a house of this nature, Bob could attest to that, is when you change a house into a museum, it's called a change of use. Now, how do you take, an old home and turn it into a museum that people are going to be walking through, strangers are going to be walking through? How do you handle the sort of the safety aspects? So how do you meld those together with keeping, as Joan said, the character of the house? Again, it wasn't a restoration. How do you renovate this home into something that can be usable, can have a variety of displays, can have changing displays periodically? So, the basic idea was, let's start with, the basic floor plan. Quickly, we started to put together, again, with, sketches like this. I know it's a little dark to see, but what would happen in each room? It's called the Paul Crunden tool room. That's something we focused on early on. How can, we display tools, and Paul would come in, as Paul Seppi would attest to, there was always somebody else coming in with a new tool, or something that was found in the basement that this has to be displayed. And then, putting certain spaces together and how they can be used. Joan always had her input as to how can we make this space flexible? How can we display items and in the future change that easily, and just see what we can do with the lighting. The lighting became Steve Dauphiné, I think it was the fellow that was helping us with lighting. We wanted the lighting to enhance any type of exhibit that was there, but not really take away from the overall character of the house. One aspect of, Joan touched upon this with the front door and the stairs. The stair itself was a real challenge. Again, there was another call from Paul Crunden. This call was that, he goes, Joe, I think I found where the original stair was. Because, the staircase itself, there's a little sketch of the center of the house. There was a stair in the center, and we knew that that wasn't original to the house, but we didn't know where the other one could have been. But we said, somehow, we don't want to live with that. That was just too infringing on the space itself. We wanted to put a fireplace in, have Joan, put some bricks in, and then design, a new staircase. And there was
I'm going to try to find it for you.
Yeah, that one slide.
Yeah, that was a good one with the shadowing.
Yeah, exactly. This little sketch was derived from that.
Yes.
And this is what this goes today.
Can you see it?
And when Paul called, with this, I quickly ran over. He was so excited. He said, he found it. Obviously, there was a staircase here at one time. You can see it. And in the drawing, sort of took the same idea, and we just sketched in how that
Oh, yes, okay.
laid
Yep.
out.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Is this the upstairs hallway stair, or is this downstairs?
this is the first floor to
To
second
the
floor.
second, okay.
Right. Now, granted, people were shorter back in that era of time, but the steps weren't. These steps were anywhere 8, 9 inches high, the riser itself. Well, typically a riser nowadays, you want to be about 7 inches, make it easier to just walk up.
Yeah.
So the idea here was, okay, now we know we can't put exactly the stair exactly the way it was originally built. Let's put it back in. So we started looking at different ideas. We came up with a few different schemes. This one was the closest to the original. This was the fireplace we talked about. But to put a staircase in, obviously you're going to bump into the fireplace. It wouldn't work with new code standards for that staircase in. We looked at another option. All right, let's make an L-shaped stair, and when you come down, that one was going to infringe on people walking through the kitchen. Sort of like, the three bears. One's too cold, you're going to bump your head on a beam, another one's too tight. So we looked at, another sort of U-shaped stair, but that took up too much space. So, ultimately, what's there now was this sort of L-shaped staircase with code compliant, if you will, risers and treads, and that's, we worked that out with certain headrooms, and so there had to be some modifications to the second floor.
Well,
Right.
I went in afterwards.
Exactly.
Okay,
You would
right?
put, exactly, yeah.
You're looking at.
So that's the staircase, that was a rough stair going up, and you came out to the second floor, which is this area here.
Okay.
And then, as you mentioned, Kenny Butler building this beautiful cherry staircase, newel posts, spindles, was, really impressive. So that's, sort of my recollection of the stair. That was something that was very much, an important part of the project, and something that had to be, really had to be, developed. As we move along with the project itself, we developed, final working drawings, if you will, to work off of this. Paul just kept on saying, remember, they're volunteers. Some of them don't know how to read blueprints. I'll be here to explain it to them, but not all the time. So, the whole aspect of conveying the information to everyone in sort of a simplistic way, but an accurate way, and a way that would meet certain the obviously the new requirements of the building. Paul was always concerned. This one photograph here was of Paul Condon after we built or dismantled one wall. Paul noticed that, this one piece of wall, for historic sake, should be left open. And I was, fortunate to catch him in, one of those explanations of why that wall wasn't finished. It's like, no, we didn't run out of money, but, we wanted to show off, really the skeleton of the home. And I think that's where, Paul's sort of, attitude towards the house, towards construction and, recreating something that was there, and how to, sort of enhance and bring it to sort of a modern day use. And, I really saw that love of structure. I think, any of us who were involved with it over the years saw that as well. Once again, with the displays and Paul's, this is the second floor plan. We wanted to take, these were bedrooms up in the second floor, obviously. For some of you who don't know the house, there were 2 bedrooms here, another bedroom here. And I remember Joan, her desire, let's keep this bedroom the way it was. Let's make that a display room, period, furniture, keep it the way, originally that space was. We had to open up the staircases we talked about, take down some existing closet walls, take down a wall here, so we could have this beautiful meeting space, which again, it was, the whole committee, Joan as well, of, how we can take this space, make it into a meeting space, make it into a display area, to give it sort of the multi-function use. And that, which is a challenge for a house of this nature, a house where all volunteers are doing work. Budget is, any project, budget is a concern, but here it was very much a realistic, constraint, if you will, but not, a constraint so much that the love of the building, I think the love of the community to put into this building really showed itself. So, that was on the second floor. On the first floor, we turned the old parlor into a new office. And Paul, I remember Paul walking into it, he goes, well, you remember what the parlor was used for back in the day. It's where, when someone died in the family, they would be laid there, to rest for 3 days. And I remember Paul almost treating this space as something, very much an emotional space, a space that, obviously, over the years, it was important to the family. And so I think, I keep talking about Paul, but I think, as Joan mentioned, he was sort of impetus of this project, and the excitement you could get, see in his face, and when he would touch a material or an object, find a nail, a stone, that would just, his face would just light up. And then from there, this board, you can look at, afterwards, I just put a couple of items down from, the opening ceremonies, a little sketch, excuse me, an idea that we talked about earlier, where Joan was mentioning, we did a little sketch of the layout of that infamous day of the torrential rains, as to, how we could, lay out the site, and the town current little article.
Here's the platform.
So I think these photographs are great, and it's just I felt honored to be part of it. 25 plus years ago.
25 plus years ago, right?
Yes, definitely, and then from Paul Crunden, all of a sudden Paul Seppi became, I felt it became another mentor for me, having worked on this project and many other projects in town, and I just publicly want to thank Paul for his efforts that he did on this project, and just
Continues.
And it continues. Exactly. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, don't need to go away from there. Anyways, we have our last speaker, but not least. Paul Seppi is going to share with us his days of being one of the workers, and he being Paul Crunden's right-hand man throughout this project, you know this. And throughout, as you just said, these past 25 years, and to this day, Paul continues to be a key supporter of keeping the Gaylord house maintained. Paul?
When Joan called me the other day and said, would you speak at the meeting, I thought right away, and I said, why don't you ask some of the old timers? And I looked around and found out I was the only old timer left. So I guess it's my job. And I knew that after, and then I was told that I would speak after Joan and that. And I said, boy, this is going to be a hard one, because I know I would probably duplicate things, but I'm going to fool everybody, because I'm going to tell you a lot of secrets that even Joan doesn't know. Okay? 60 years ago, I moved into the town of Hartland, and it was in 1952 or 53. My wife, she knows all the dates, she'll tell me if I'm wrong. And I met Paul Crunden, and he asked me to join the fire department, and one of our first jobs was to go over to Irene Shepherd's house, which was the Gaylord house, and burn down the horse barn. The house was almost concealed by trees. You could hardly see it, and if you went past the road, down the road, you couldn't see it. And we went over there, and the house was in pretty good condition. Which never shows on your pictures here. There was a nice front porch wrapped around the front, wrapped around the side of the Paul Crunden room. This was attached to a woodshed where she kept her oil and all her wood and antiques and everything that she didn't know were antiques. And that was attached to with two carriage houses, which Joan always wished we still had, but she never knew that they were gone. And back of that was the hen house, and the next two attached to that was a two-story barn, and next to that was the horse barn. So we burned, with the MDC asked us if we burned the horse barn down, so we burned the horse barn down. And Irene lived there with, well, first of all, Irene Shepherd was the daughter of let's see, Charlie, Charlie Hamlin, that's right. When I first went over that house, the Hamlin farm was down the road past if you went past the gate into the MDC land. And Charlie Hamlin had a big farm down there. He had a brother, Charlie, Ross Hamlin, and Irene's mother married Charlie Hamlin. And I never found out what happened to Charlie Hamlin, but her mother went to New York and was found dead in an apartment at one time when she was a very young girl. And old Ed Gaylord took over, the grandmother and grandfather, raised her for the rest of her life. When he sold the property to the MDC in 1920 or 1930, he made a deal with the MDC for $25 a month. They could live there until the end of their life. And Irene was in on the deal, I believe, and she paid $25 a month up until 1973 or 1979 when she lived there. The stipulation was that they keep the house up, but they never did. She lived there with her husband. She married Lou Shepard, who was a watchman for the MDC. And Lou would every day make his rounds around the reservoir, go down Route 20, down to the water's edge. Probably some of you have been there on the bus, where the old Feely farm was. He'd go down there and look around, come back, and be home at 3:30 and go to sleep. And we used to go fishing down at the reservoir, all of us young fellas, and we'd sneak down the reservoir, and it was a long walk back, and we'd carry a lot of fish up the hill, so we used to wait for him. He was a watchman now. We used to wait for him to get a ride back up the hill. And every once in a while, he would say to Paul told me this one, he never said it to me, but he would say to Paul, geez, I've got to arrest one of you guys because it was my job. He would arrest one of the guys and he'd bring him over to Stanley Ransom. Stanley Ransom was the judge of probate, and we named him $2 Ransom because Stanley would say $2, you pay your $2, and that guy would say, yes, it's $2, and he has a very cheap ride up the hill. She lived there. Her husband became sick and he became crippled. I remember Paul and I going over and building a wheelchair ramp for him, and we did that. Then he became invalid and he was in bed all the time, and she had people coming in to take care of him. Her husband died and she lived there alone for quite a while. I used to bring the newspaper to her on Sunday morning. My wife and I, after church, we'd bring a newspaper to her, and she would say to me, "Oh, I got a leak in my roof." I would say, "Why don't you fix it?" She said, "Well, it's not my house, I'm not going to fix it." So many a time during a rainstorm, I would get a call and I'd go over there and go up in the attic, and you'd beat me up for this if you knew about it. But she had so many antiques in the attic. She had beautiful china from Limoges china that her mother brought from England. She had umbrella stands. She had cream separators, old sap buckets. And I remember taking the cream separator to catch the water here, and a Limoges pitcher to catch the water here. Of course, I didn't know anything about antiques. I knew they were kind of pretty, but. And then the fire department was going to have an auction one year. We decided we're going to have an auction, and Stanley Ransom was going to be the auctioneer. So I stopped over Irene Shepherd's and said, "Do you have anything you can donate for the auction?" And she said, "Sure, Paul, back up to the shed." I backed up to the shed, and we filled 3 pickup loads of antiques from that house. Butter churns, sap buckets. I have a Limoges pitcher at home that I bought at the auction, I think for 10 cents. And so we brought it down and we were selling it. We had quite a do here, and I remember we sold one butter churn for 50 cents, and one didn't sell, and we gave it to Stanley to put in his collection for the Historical Society. And I think right now, if a antique dealer went in and saw that, he would think he had a bonanza. But we sold, I don't think we made $80 on the whole thing. So she stood there as long as she could, and then she moved to Winston, and then the house started to deteriorate real bad. A lot of the young guys in town figured that was a place to go hang out and smash windows. And I remember one day, Paul and I were over the firehouse and we heard a window smash. And so he said, oh, so there's the kids that are in trouble making kids again. And he always, even before, he always said to me, boy, that would be a nice place for the Historical Society, for Stanley to put his stuff, but it was too bad, too far going. So we heard this smash and we ran over there and we could hear kids upstairs banging and knocking things apart. And she said, what are we going to do, Paul? So I said, here's what we're going to do. I said, I hollered out and I said, Paul, you go to the left, and Lenny wasn't there. I said, Lenny, you go to the right and I'll stay here. If they try to run, shoot. Pretty soon, two young fellows from town come out with their hands up. And Paul said, he said, here's what we're going to do. I know the fellows, they're old and now they have their own families and everything, but I'm not going to name anybody. Paul said, here's what we're going to do. We know you did this. And they said, oh no, we didn't do anything. Well, we don't care if it was you or not, but you know all the kids in town. Now you spread the word that if we find one more window broken or one more piece of thing damaged in this, we're going to turn you into the state police. It stopped completely. I guess the word got around. It was pretty bad shape, but it stopped. And Paul always had the vision of fixing that, even before you talked to him, you know. And so I was going to talk a little bit about the renovation, but Joan did such a good job.
What would you like to
Stop
see?
it right there, go back one.
Yeah.
Can you go back one?
Yeah, I can.
For those of you who've never been over there, do you see that on the right, the picture on the wall, you know, with
The photo,
those
listing of,
on the right?
Mhm.
It has the name of everybody who gave money or who worked on the house during the 5 years that we've put it up. So if you go to that,
perfect place for information.
yes.
Yeah,
And opposite that, on the wall that you can't see, is the open wall with the glass on it that shows the lab that Paul wanted left open for the town to see.
But as I was saying, Joan did such a good job. She didn't leave much left for me to talk about. But I'm going to tell some secrets that even Joan doesn't know. Paul was, he was a funny guy. We got along real well. And he used to tell me a lot of secrets and so forth. He used to talk about old man Gaylord, and I guess Mr. Gaylord had a funny, every time he made a sentence, he would say some funny little sound like "hossis" or something. And Paul would talk to me like that while we're working. Every time he'd say "hossis," get the hammer. And, so one day,
Paul.
yeah,
That's the one to show, that's Paul Brendan right there.
yeah.
For those of you who don't know.
Paul used to, he was so devoted, I didn't know this was being done until one day he came over to my house, I think it was right after the meeting, and he said to me, you know, Paul, we've got a big job ahead of us. And I said, what do you mean, we? And so he explained what we had to do, and it was getting cold, and it was in November, I believe, and he said, we got to get a roof on right away to save what we got left. So I said, gee, Paul, I was working out of state at the time, and I said, I don't have much time, and maybe Sunday I could help you. And he ran out and he got Jack Myler, Tim Root, and a casket, I think, and they put a roof on, right over the old roof, just a temporary roof, which we changed about 10 years later. We put a new roof on and stripped it. But we had a lot of fun, and one day Paul was, every day he used to go past my house, even after his wife died, and he had a major operation. Almost every evening he would go by my house, peep the horn, hoping that I would come along. And he would go up there and he'd work a little bit until dark. So one night I finished mowing the lawn and he went by, so I figured I'd go up. I got up and got up to the house and the cellar hatchway door was open. And you could hear him upstairs tapping away. He was putting in a window all by himself, and he would always talk to himself, and he'd say, "Ha, sis." So I went down the cellar hatchway, and the plumber had just finished putting the ductwork from the first floor to the second floor. The furnace wasn't in, so I said, "I'll fool Paul." And I went over to the ductwork and I said, "Paul Grundon, this is Ed Gaylord." I said, "What are you doing in my house?" The hammering stopped for about 30 seconds. And then a voice hollered down, "If that's you, Ed, come on up and give me a hand." I went home, sneaked back to the woods. I didn't want to know what it was. I got in my car and went around, and I pulled in the yard and went up the stairs, and he never said a word. I was waiting for him to say Ed Gaylord, which is pretty superstitious. And then I started laughing, and he found out. He said, "Well, I knew it was you all along." Another time, you see all the nice big stones on the steps you got there? Well, Paul came to me one day and he said, "We need some stone steps." He said, "I know where they are. They're down the Spook Lot." And if you ever heard of Spook Lot in West Hartland, that was way back in 1840. One of the old farmers' wife killed a little girl who was a ward of her house. And from then on, Paul said they all call it the Spook Lot. You can't go down and play with the spook by the Spook Lot. They wouldn't even go down the hollow through that road because of the Spook Lot. And he said, "It's down the Spook Lot. You want to go down with me and look at the stones?" Well, I said, "I can't, Paul. I'm pretty busy." So we got Lenny Ransom. They went to see Irv Hart, who is the superintendent of maintenance down there. And Paul said, "I don't know if they'll give us all those stones." So he said to Dave Hart, he said, "Can I have 3 stones I need for steps?" Dave said, "Well, 3 stones, you can have them from the old Spook Lot down there." So Paul went down there with, I wasn't with him then. He went down with Lenny Ransom and Kenny Butler, and Butler's truck and an old tractor, and he dragged, and what did he do? He took home 12 steps. And Paul loved stone anyway. And I said, "Paul, he only gave you 3 steps." He said, "Well, I forgot to tell him it was 3 sets of steps." I took 3 extra ones to put under the foundation. Paul always said to me, he got caught one time. I always had to go on this. He loved stones, and he wanted to get stones all the time for the project. And he loved stones, and I was always I was the driver for the truck to get the stones. And one day we were over by Mr. Stepek's house, and we were stealing stones, to be honest with you. Mr. Stepek came along and said, with his wife Elda, and Paul said, "Oh, we got caught." So he said to Mr. Stepek, he said, "Well, you guess you caught us stealing stones." And Mr. Stepek said, "Paul, you don't steal stones, you just borrow them and put them in another place." Anytime we had to steal stones, Paul would say to me, "Let's go borrow some stones." So we borrowed all those big stones for the steps, and that's where they came from the Spook Lot. And I think the funniest one was really that Joan doesn't even know about. Joan told you about how we built this wooden platform for her to do her presentation. Paul came to me one day and he said, "You know Mr. Emmerich down the road, he works for Mrs. Feely." Remember Mrs. Feely? And he said she wants to donate 2 stones from the old Miller Tavern in the Hollow. If you go to now you'll see there's 2 brown stones that we made into a bench to sit on, and she wants to donate them, and you want to get them with me. And I said, "Okay." So we grabbed my tractor one Saturday morning and went up and got the the 2 stones and brought them down. And when we brought them down, we found this great big flat stone, about 5 foot by 5 feet, 10 inches thick, and was to weigh a couple of tons. And Paul said, I know what that is. That was the platform these steps went up to. And he said, they would make a good platform for Joan to step onto, and it'd be permanent, you know? So, okay, I couldn't lift it with my machine, so we had to go get a big 680 case and go up there on a Sunday morning, and it had been there so long that the big maple tree in front of the Feely place had grown right around it. So we spent a half a day chopping the roots out of the tree. We managed to get it down, and then we needed stones to build a platform underneath it to raise it up. So we had to go on another borrowing. And so we borrowed stones up the old Milo Cove Road, and we built the foundation on the bottom. Put the big fat stone on the top, and as we just finished it, I looked up into the upstairs room. Were you there, Joan?
No.
And who was up there but Mrs. Feely, looking out the window. And I heard Paul say, uh-oh. And he went in the house. He was in there about 15 minutes, and he came back out. And he said, Paul, I got some bad news. And I said, what? He said, we got to bring the stone back. It's a big flat stone. She wants it back. And I said, why? He said, well, she said, I gave you the 2 step stones, but I didn't give you the big flat one. I might need the fat one, the big one someday. Well, Mrs. Feely was pushing 90 years old, the last heir of the Feely farm, and she's going to need a big flat stone someday. So I said, here's what we'll do, Paul. I said, let's make it, we won't bring it back, and we'll, if she ever, you see her again and she says, did you bring my stone back? Just say, well, make some excuse, you know, we didn't have a machine big enough to lift it. And I said, she's pushing 90, so we don't have to worry. We don't have to worry too long. And then it'll be our stone. He said, okay, we'll do that. That's why you got a wooden platform. He said, okay, we'll do that. And the next day, I think it was Sunday morning, he came over to the house, and he said, Paul, you know, I've been awake all night thinking about that stone. He said, we've got to bring it back. And I said, why, Paul? And he said, well, you know, up the cemetery, I've got a plot next to my wife that I'm going to be buried in. And he said, the next plot to me is old Mrs. Field. And there was one thing that Paul always wanted to do, which we didn't finish. And he always wanted to build a stone wall all around the Stark House. And he had a major operation, and he was getting weak, and I knew he couldn't do it, but I guess it was 2 or 3 springs. When I read it, he would come over and he'd say, Paul, we got to get at that wall. So kind of appease him. Twice we went up there and laid out a few stakes where it was going to go and put the string. I knew we'd never get to it, you know. We went as far as to go to the MDC and ask them if we could take stones from all the pastures back there. They said, adamant no, we couldn't touch them. So Paul still insisted that we were going to do it. And I said, Paul, where are we going to get 90 to 100 tons of stone to build that wall with, you know, especially in your condition? And he said, maybe we can borrow them. We never did. To his dying day, he wanted to do that. 2 days before he died, I went over to see him, and he woke up, and what did he say to me? He pointed towards the house, and he said, remember the wall. And the day he died, next day his son came down, his grandson came down and said, Paul sent a message to you. Don't forget the wall. That's who he was.
No, doesn't ring a bell.
That's the place with Lilienthal, Iron White,
Oh, maybe.
maybe.
Not sure. All right. Well, I have to say that was just wonderful.
Yeah.
And a personal story to that, and all rounded out as far as what has happened 25 years ago and where we are today. Thank you so much for sharing, Paul, Joan, and Joe. Terrific. We're now going to have some cake. So, and I hope that you can make it to the Blueberry Picnic. And at that point, I know Marcia Ransom's going to talk a little bit about that day also, and a few others. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, Rob.
For the heck of it.
So I think we have a goal. Those I just don't know, but- This is from Cindy James, her favorite vase, and I don't know who brought the flowers. For you, it was, we knew you would like that.
I wanted to see the cake before. Oh. Whenever we cut it, so I'd like to take a picture.
Yeah, can we somehow, maybe maybe the three of you can stand behind it and take a picture. Yeah, we need to take a picture. It's about, no, it doesn't.
I was going to because I saw your car. Will you get this? It's rare. Will you read this?